I think it's very helpful, actually. I've been debating about this in my mind, if it's good to ask, guests about, the future, because I know they have highly, like they're highly connected. But I think it's helpful to get this advice on, okay, chaos might come, but this is how you deal with it. Because when I then see chaos is coming, like you're talking about conflict, then I look at it in a positive way. Like
Yeah.
I observe it, I'm like, okay, so I'm learning something from this. This is part of the great shift. I'm more prepared. And I just wanted to comment that I see a purpose in that.
Yeah.
However, now I would love to learn more about you, Julie, because from a young age you've had this connection with the divine. And you say that we all do, but for you it seems like it's more a conscious connection. And you also had a meeting with Jesus. You've been out of your body. Could you share a little bit about how your life has been having
Yes.
this connection?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. So we're all born psychic. We're all born connected because we are. We're always connected. And if you look at any baby, they're lighting up. They've got a lot of light around them, and toddlers will be talking to their imaginary friends, and that's who we are. What happens is we start to close it down mostly. Once we start school and we're getting on with life, it just starts to go more into the background for most people, but it can be reactivated at any time. And for some of us, it didn't really close down. And so for me, it didn't. I was very aware, even at 5, 6, and 7, of light and energy, and I was very sensitive. And this is what they'll say: you're a very sensitive person. But you were aware of mood and energy and anxiety and hostility and happiness too. You're very aware of it. But when I was around about 8, so 7.5, 8.5, somewhere around there, my life was not good at all. And so my parents had split up, and it had been very nasty run up to that split up. There was violence, there was screaming, there was lots of crying. It was an unsafe place to be. And so I kind of hid from that within my spirituality. I didn't know what it was, but I just knew that if I sat under the tree and I talked to the tree, I felt safe. I felt safer sitting under the tree at the bottom of my garden and talking to what I didn't know was spirit, but lovely lights and energies and things around, than I did in my house. So I was just always open. And then after they split up, my mother basically had a breakdown. She was drinking massive amounts of alcohol. She was using a lot of medication, anti-anxiety. In those days, it was Valium in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. And drinking alcohol with Valium is not a good combination. So basically, my mother was stoned out of her face for most of the time on legal prescribed medication and alcohol, and so was not present as a mum. And I did see my dad, but he lived 100 miles away. So he'd come and pick me up, take me out for the day, and occasionally I would stay with him. But basically, my dad was absent and my mother was emotionally and physically absent, unless she was kicking off, which she did a lot. So she would be screaming, crying, lashing out, very violent. I was constantly covered in bruises. It was not a nice place to be. And so I dived more and more into my spiritual side. I would cry at night in bed, and I would talk to Jesus, and I would say I need help, and I would just feel a lot of light around me. Anyway, as a very neglected child, these kind of children, and I've studied this, these kind of children are targets for not so nice people, like pedophiles, like abusers. They target the children who are invisible, who are not likely to tell. And I was targeted by a local neighborhood, not very nice man. And he groomed me for the best part of a year. And it's an interesting dynamic that happens between a child and an adult that is in that kind of energy of sickness. So it culminated over this year with an event where the abuse, the sexual abuse that had been taking place, molestation over quite a long period, culminated in a full-blown on abuse, physical abuse, rape session. So during that session, I left my body. I remember the pain and the fear, and then I remember I passed out, I think. Okay, so I left my body. The next thing I knew, it was in the woodland. I was in the woods, okay? And the next thing I knew, I was high up in this tree, sitting on this branch, talking to this man who was sat next to me in these lovely white robes, and he had these incredible eyes that just shone kindness, and he had his arm around me, and he's saying, never mind what's going on down there, let's you and me look at the birds and look at the trees and the leaves. And we were looking at the nests in the trees. We were having a lovely time, and I just felt completely safe with him. And he was saying to me that, he comes and sits with me and he talks to me, but I'd never seen him as clearly as this before. This was, full blown on, like a man sat next to me. And I asked him, who are you? What's your name? And he said, Jesus, but it sounded different. And I couldn't quite get it. It took me about another probably 20 years before I realized that what he said was Yeshua or something close to that. But I knew that it was my friend from the book and the Bible, that it was the man that I had books on. My grandmother had given me books about Jesus, and I knew it was him. And he said to me, I'm here anytime. I'm always with you. You can talk to me anytime. And I just felt totally safe. And then he said to me, it's time to go back down to your body in a moment, and it'll hurt, and I'll be here later to talk to you, and it'll be all right. So I said, okay. So the next thing I knew, I was in my body. I've never known pain like it. The headache was, I felt like my head was going to explode. It's the trauma response in the body when something bad like that happens. So anyway, I went home, I cleaned myself up. I remember sneaking in the house and getting a clean dress and going down to the shed at the bottom of the garden and changing my clothes because they were messy, and stuffing them, hiding them in the shed, and going back into the house and acting like nothing had happened. So that was that first experience when I left my body. And I look back now with the benefit of hindsight and think I must have passed out. This man was laying on top of me, full-blown adult on a small child, probably crushed my chest to death, and I probably didn't have enough oxygen and passed out. But, it was an out-of-body experience. So over the next decade, I talked to Jesus a lot. I went to church a lot, and I would listen to the vicars and the ministers and the priests, and I'd be like, no, that's not right. That's not right. Especially when they're talking about hellfire and damnation and bow down to God. And Jesus is saying to me, God doesn't want you to bow down to him. God loves you, reveres you, doesn't need you to humble me, please, 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 So Jesus was teaching me directly, and he was always there. So I was a very strong Christian. But as the years went on, I realized that the Bible and the Christian philosophy, and I read the Bible back to front. I went to Bible study class, I was confirmed, I was baptized. But what I was seeing and knowing was Satan in the Bible. You're not supposed to be able to heal. I could heal from 12, 13. I could put my hands on something that would get very hot and pain would go away. I would heal my period pains from my monthly cycle. I could heal a headache. And Jesus was saying, we can all heal. You all have it. There's healing energy within your body. And the chakras in the palms of your hand are healing chakras. And when you step into the healing energy, it will just flow. And we can all do it. And he was showing me when I was a child, he would look at, he would say to me, see that child has just fallen over and grazed their knee. The first thing they'll do is cup their hand and put it on their knee. We do it automatically. Something hurts, you automatically, there's healing energy going into it. So I was healing, and the Bible was telling me I was Satan because I was healing, and because I could talk to Jesus, and because I could see the energy around things. So I went through a real horrible period at sort of 13, 14 of trying to figure out, am I allowed to be like this? Is this bad? But every time I felt into it, I was told, how can this be bad and wrong when it feels so good and loving and safe and beautiful? And when you're helping other people as well, how is this wrong? So I started studying more spiritual type things then. There wasn't much around in the 70s. But I went through more abuse. I went through more violence consistently until I was about 21, when it finally stopped. And that included more physical, mental, sexual abuse that went on through my teens. And each of those situations created damage within my energy field, within my mental health, within my emotional health. I was full of trauma, um, and not in a very good place. And when all of the abuse finally stopped, when I left home, I got safe, I moved into my own place, that's when the PTSD really kicked in. But back then in 1980, 81, through till probably in the 90s, but I was really struggling with my mental health from about 82 to 85. I was incredibly depressed and anxious and panic attacks and flashbacks. Um, I was to the point of being suicidal, where I just couldn't cope. I just couldn't cope. I mean, when I was a young girl, 21, 22, I'd had the most horrific 15 years that nobody knew about. I hadn't told anybody. I hadn't had any help. I'd gone to the doctors because I was having such terrible pains in my chest and throat, which I know now to be a panic attack. And they just gave me Valium. And I didn't want that. I'd seen what that had done to my mother. So I chucked them in the bin. And I was just struggling on. So eventually it just got too much. And so I just said to my spiritual team, I want to go home. I don't want to be here anymore. I had no fear of death. I never had, because every time I connected with the other side, it was just pure love. And that was so the bliss, so beautiful and so safe and so wonderful. And I looked at my life, which was full of pain and angst and horror. I just wanted to be up there and not down here. So I made the decision. I had a child and he was 3. And I said, he went to his dad's for a week. And I just intended that I'm no good to him. I'm no good to anybody. So I made the decision. So the doctor at that point had given me sleeping tablets and had given me Valium and had given me paracetamol because of all the pains, the headaches and all the rest of it I was having. And I just took the whole lot with the intention of checking out and going home. And I do not recommend this, but I completely understand when people are so desperate and living in despair and fear 24/7, and you can't see a way out and you can't see an end to it, that you think the only way out to stop the pain is to die. And it's not. But for me at that point, it was. So I took these pills and I went to sleep. I left goodbye notes and all the rest of it. This wasn't a cry for help. This was an absolute determined, I'm going home. And it's interesting because when I was writing my book on abuse, which I wrote in 2017, and I did a lot of research, there's over 20% of children who are abused sexually commit suicide before the age of 25. So it's, there's a lot, this happens to a lot of people. You can't cope with it. So anyway, I went to sleep and expecting not to wake up again. And the next thing I know, I'm lifting up, I'm rising up, and I'm suddenly in the white light and I am surrounded by beings of light. And I said, great, I'm home. I thought I was dead. I'm going home. Great, this is fabulous. And they said, oh no, you're only visiting. So,
To watch the full video, click the link below, and I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel.